Hello everybody, this is Andrew Broussard from Andrew Broussard Watercolors. It feels like it's been a few days since I filmed a complete tutorial. I've been focusing a lot on learning portraits and just doing time-lapse of those portrait practices. And whenever I do a watercolor or a time-lapse or anything like that, I'm just doing that so I can put on music and relax. But I felt like it's been a while since I filmed a tutorial with watercolor, and I wanted to, get one. There was a topic I wanted to talk about. So I have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua. Right before I turned on the film, I saturated it. I just spread water over it. I just did a second coat of that. This is just so I can go wet and wet. Palette-wise, I'm going to look at the Ron Ranson palette. As I use the colors, I'll talk about it. But I think the experiment for today is we're going to paint it in, and then at the end we're going to experiment with white gouache and black gouache over it. I'm thinking maybe white gouache in the sky, maybe in the background as kind of thin layer to see if we can get the fog effect. The black gouache to see if we can get more contrast and get things to pop in different directions. So that's the experiment that we're looking at. So landscape-wise, composition-wise, I really have nothing in mind. We're just going to let it kind of develop. We'll just do things nice and gentle. This is raw sienna, Da Vinci brand raw sienna. Of course, I'm not sponsored by any brands that I mention. I just like to throw the names out there for the things that I'm using. Sometimes different brands will formulate things different ways. So you can use any brand you want, but it's just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm using. So this is the raw sienna, just going a little wet and wet. We'll probably have a stream as per usual, but we shall see what we wind up doing. Let's get a little bit of put a little alizarin in the sky lately, but I'm not really getting, I never get too much pop from the alizarin. It's either the wet and wet or just a strong diffusion taking place, but I don't really get much of a change from it. But it is nice to kind of put in there. Usually people will take that and mix it with the Payne's Gray. This is ultramarine. Now my ultramarine is tainted a little bit with phthalo blue. I think I mentioned that last time. They're kind of close to each other on my palette, and I recently moved it further away, but when I had scraped it and moved it, I think I caught a little bit of phthalo blue with it, so I'll let you know if that is happening. It's kind of obvious. It'll be kind of a more mentholated blue. And let's see, let's take a little Payne's Gray and we'll mix it with the alizarin. People use that for like a kind of mauve-y cloud effect. All right, now, if you wanted to, one thing I haven't done in a while as well is you can take the paper towel and you can lift out cloud formations and cloud shapes if you want. Get a little bit of lines going, a little softening. Okay, so that's going to be it for our sky. We have our horizon line about here. Foreground wise, not quite sure what we're going to do. Let's see. Why don't we do a waterway that comes out here? All right, I'm gonna mix some raw sienna with some ultramarine. Yeah, now that's where I get the phthalo blue. It's on that side of the paint. But don't worry if you don't have phthalo blue on the palette. That's just, like I said, a little issue that I'm having with mine. So, just shaping this out. Let's get light red oxide with our ultramarine to make a purple. These are going to be background trees. I'm just putting in a varied line, so just going from left to right on the horizon, and I'm trying to vary the height of it. Then I want a stronger raw sienna. I want that to go on top, front. Bring a little bit down into the water. Let's see. Then we could let's mix some burnt umber with some ultramarine. Get a little bit of a dark. Put that down in front, kind of just layering our way forward. The colors are kind of arbitrary and kind of just experimental as we layer away do layers as we come forward. When we dry, everything will soften, and then we'll do a more pronounced extreme mid-ground, foreground. You can see scrapes in the paper. I must have caught it with the side of the rigger, the hake brush, sorry. Yeah, it's getting a little scratchy. That's weird. Okay, so let's I feel like we're getting really Ron Rancing with this. Let's get some more raw sienna. Let's experiment with that. Mix a little bit of ultramarine into it. This is wet and wet. This is going to be a tree structure closer to us. I'm putting it along the edge here to kind of cap off and block the eye from going off the side of the page. It's going to sit down in here. We could do something similar on this side with I'm going to probably use a dark. Let me grab some ultramarine and burnt umber for a dark. You could also mix in Payne's Gray if I want a dark as well. And just throw it down in here as just a shadow and just help this tree start sitting in place. Bring those reflections down. I have the number 4 rigger that I've been using and the number 1 rigger that I use. This is the number 4. Everything's going to disperse though since it's wet and wet, but this will give us a little bit of depth where we have the wet and wet and then we have the dry over it. Let's take that same mixture. I'm going to kind of cap off this side. I'm going to try not to be too symmetrical left and right. This is just to prevent the eyes from going off the page. In fact, what we'll probably want to be doing is having some trees line up in here and then have their foliage up here. So just wet and wet, and then we'll get more crisp when we do a dry off. In fact, just to show you what's going on in my mind, I'm thinking we'll do some trees like this in front. And then we'll use, like I said, the gouache, the black gouache, to kind of make them pop and see how that affects it. All right, so we could play with this part all day, but as it dries. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry it off. We're going to work on our foreground. Then we will experiment with the black and white. Alright, I think we're dry enough. You can see how we essentially just blocked in shapes, and then we can kind of figure out which layer we want to start at with the crispness and the intensity. I'm going to leave that background layer alone, and then kind of this mid-foreground layer is where we'll start putting in stronger pigments. It's going to be the wet and dry stage, which gives us really cool effect having that softness, and then this guy kind of pops over it. So I could trace over branches and trunks that are already there, or I can go alongside ones that are already present, and doing so will give me a little bit of depth as well at that range. So I prefer to run them separately. Be careful about repeating that shape just like I did right there. You can use the side of the rigger for texture as well. Help that little piece ground itself. And number one rigger you can use as well. That used to be my workhorse rigger, but like I said, I am starting to really enjoy the number 4. Mainly for the fact that it can carry more pigment with it and more water. And this that I'm doing is just a mixture of the burnt umber, ultramarine, and Payne's gray, just to get some semblance of a dark for me to put in this stage. It will dry lighter, but the whole purpose of that's the whole purpose of experimenting with the black gouache after this. I'm going to grab the rigger, the hake. I don't know why I'm mixing up today. And I can stipple in more texture. Now, whenever you're doing this, this is what you want to keep in mind. You want to vary the density of the dots and the patterns that are taking place. So you don't want a repeated pattern, and you don't want it to just be all one splotch. You want to have areas that are dense, areas that are loose. With this, since it's watercolor and what we're putting in is wet, this spot is wet that we're putting in at this moment. If you then pass over it again or too much, it'll start doing a wet and wet feed, and it'll start blending on you. And sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. So just be wary of that possibility taking place. So what often works, and this is something I believe I learned from Stephen Cronin. He has YouTube videos, so I'd check him out if I were you. Put it in, dry it off, then put the next layer on top of it. These guys didn't get grounded. Also be careful of how this sits over the background. For instance, this layer right here in the background, here I am building that spot, it could potentially read as the background instead of the foreground foliage. So let me do a dry off. I'm going to grab more pigment. This will only take a quick dry off. You can play around with different colors in this stage as well. Here I just mixed burnt umber and ultramarine just to kind of get a dark. Other things you can stipple in is burnt sienna, the light red oxide, do lemon yellow. You can play around with different things, different color combinations, depending on the time of the year, what feel you want, what color you want, etc. And I'm going to grab the number 1 rigger. I readjusted my art desk. Like I said, I've been doing gouache experiments, and I've been doing the oil painting portrait experiments, so I've been doing a lot of other mediums outside of the watercolor. That's why I just haven't had too many tutorial videos up lately. And then I also have just a lot of different supplies on the art desk now, so there's a little bit of a rearrangement taking place. The way I think of it, and it's quite exhausting, is work will start back up in August. So in the meanwhile, it gives me over 60 days to try to do a portrait practice a day. And if a portrait practice lasts me at least an hour, that'll get me 60 hours of practice underneath the belt for portrait work. But I definitely enjoy that. But it also it becomes like quite tedious. It's exhausting. So here's the stage where I kind of play around, build up textures, see what direction I could push it in, try not to overwork it, etc., etc. Build up foliage. But what I'm going to do now is do a dry off, and we're going to experiment with our black and white gouache. Trying to figure out what tray I want to use. These little guys, if you have an Asian market near you, you most likely can find them there. There's usually an aisle that has pots and pans at an Asian market, and then they have these little ceramic porcelain dishes. I guess it's ceramic. I'm not sure what the material is. This one's plastic, but they're good for kind of putting gouache. And in one video, we put gouache in, and we mixed lemon yellow into it and put that on top and showed how we could get the lemon yellow to pop using gouache. But ultimately, I recommend some sort of other dish like this for gouache. It has a chalkiness to it that will infiltrate the palette, and it'll mess up the other colors around it. So you want to do your best to limit that mixture on the palette. So this is Da Vinci White Titanium, and this is the Royal Talons gouache. Okay, so I'm going to grab a round brush. And our first experiment was white. So this might just make things just absolutely terrible, but the whole point is for us to experiment and learn things and see what works for us. I believe J.M.W. Turner, well, he used gouache, like that's a fact. But I believe somewhere I'd read that he used it within skies in watercolor. So I'm not going to be able to take a before and after picture since I'm filming with my camera itself and I'm doing a live stream. But as you're watching, hopefully you can see that difference. And this is just a light mixture that I'm putting in over it. I'm trying to keep this gouache pure. One thing I found that I have been despising lately is a mixture of black and white, like the gray. I don't mind if something is black and white painted, but when I do the oils or gouache, if I have other colors on the palette, I've been looking at what's called the Zorn palette, which is black, white, vermilion, and yellow ochre. But if I just start mixing that black and white and just getting the gray, I really don't like the way it affects things, the way it looks. So it's something I'm trying to avoid, having that gray being put down here. So this is just white gouache. This is a higher concentration than in this region. Put some back in here, just for us to see how it goes on top of other colors. See if we can get it thicker. Yeah, that's more on the thicker side. I'm also going to bring it down into our water region. So it kind of helps it sit back a little bit in the background. Foreground, it does give a little interesting overlap. You can tell that you're using white paint. There is like a big thing in the art community or watercolor community where gouache is like kind of blasphemy. But like I said, this is for experimentation, and this is for you guys to make your own decision. And this is just for us to see how it looks if we did a coat over the background. And then we'll play around with the black. Yeah. So let's do that. So that's the white, if we were to just kind of pass it over the water and the sky. So let me do, I got to do a little bit of blending instead of getting that hard edge right along the edge. Get a little softening right there. That's cool. So let me do a dry off because, like I said, I don't want the black and white to mix. Okay, this should be good enough dry off. So this is going to be like as pure black as I can get for us to see how it layers on top. I could add it into this group. I could add a tree in front, and I think that's what I'm going to do is add a tree in front. So then I get the depth that I was talking about earlier, where we kind of did wet and wet, and then we came over it dry. The purpose of this is because the wet and wet softens, and then the dry is a little bit harsher and sharper and darker in value. And now this gouache, the whole purpose is to get that darkest possible value we can get as an easy means. So doing another layer. But like I said, I don't want it to mix with the white. I'm not the biggest fan of that black, white, gray mix whenever there's other colors being utilized. If it's just black and white being used and it's just a grayscale painting, that's cool, but I personally am not a fan. But that's something you want to experiment with and see if you like it or not. That might be something like, oh, I want that gray effect. I want that for rocks or something. I'm going to take the hake and we'll stipple in some black as it's the closer foliage. This would be a good spot to experiment with blacks mixed with yellow to get a green, or black mixed with raw sienna for green as well. That might add some interest. Okay, so everything we just put in just now was black gouache. I am going to take the number 1 rigger. I know I referred to it earlier. Let's grab it now. This will get me finer twigs and branches. So you can put some interesting patterns in and whatnot and just play around. Just going to give everything life. As you mix more water in it, it will decrease its value, so you can play around with that as well and see what range you can get with the black gouache if you choose to experiment with it. By the way, speaking of art supplies and whatnot, down below I have a link for my Patreon account. I would love for you to consider joining and supporting me. I have 2 very cheap, simple tiers, and one of the tiers gives you access to premium content. The proceeds from that help this channel going, and they also help purchase art supplies. If you don't want to or are unwilling to join, totally fine with that. I love you guys just for watching and commenting and asking questions. In fact, today marks the day I got my 501st subscriber on YouTube, so that was really, really cool. I missed the 500 mark. I was waiting for it yesterday, and then it went from 499 to 501, so I'm not sure exactly who was my 500th, but that's really exciting, because as you can tell, I put a lot of time in and a lot of videos in. So all right, so that's the black gouache. Now I do feel like we need something to kind of connect these 2 regions. Maybe something needed to be a little bit sharper back in this area. And I could put a landmass in there. I could have a tree branch or something hang over and connect these 2 masses as well. What else can we do? Yeah, we can do those. Why don't we do that? Why don't we take a kind of dead or a branch that fallen. Use this guy to connect these 2. This is a foreground element that I noticed in a Jasper Francis Cropsey. Is it Francis Cropsey? Jasper Francis? Yeah, Jasper Francis Cropsey painting that I had sketched within the past week, and it was an element that he had put in where it was in the foreground, and they had mountain ranges in the background, and this kind of bramble coming up connected the foreground to the background, kind of filled in that space. An example of that, so you might know what I mean, what I'm talking about, is Van Gogh's Starry Night, where you look at it and you see the church spire. So there's the city, and there's the church spire that goes up into the sky, and that does a connection between the sky and the city, and combines the 2. We could stipple. I don't know why I can't talk today. I feel like it's leaning over quite a bit, so let me add something that'll help balance it and help it keep upright. One thing that I do enjoy doing, I don't know if we'll have an area for it in this, it might make it just way too busy, is taking white gouache and painting in a dead branch, a dead fallen log, It's a pretty cool effect in the foreground using that white. That might have to wait for another day. Let's dry it off. We'll take a look. Actually, now that we have the rigger, the number 1, let's get it. It's almost pure gouache from the tube, and we'll see how that looks once I do the dry off. Sometimes pure watercolor from the tube and pure gouache from the tube for me will have that, what's the word? Not a I think a satin effect, where it kind of has that, that sheen to it. So that might be something you like, something you don't like. So I'd experiment as well. Okay, so dry off time. Oh, I had this rigger. Oh, okay. Okay, compositionally, there's something that I think we need to do. We dry a little bit of black gouache just to darken this area. I'm going to try to soften the shape so it doesn't draw too much attention, but that's to help our eye stop from going off the page. I don't want it as dark because it's a little bit receded compared to this foreground, but that's something to experiment with as well. There you go. And that gives that a little more depth right here. And like I said, the goal will prevent the eye from going off the page. Okay, we should be good. We'll put a mat on top and sign it. I'm trying to prevent these videos from being too long because I know they can be tedious. The gentleman that I've been following for oil painting and gouache and all that for portrait work, the videos are over an hour long, which they need to be. Like, I need to see like all those alla prima steps, and I need to hear him talk, and I need to hear him. I need to see him do the different contours of the eyelid. But it's exhausting watching a video that's an hour and a half, and you're doing a painting along with it. I know it's quite tedious, so that's why I'm trying to minimize these for you all. So there's the results. So that was our black gouache over the watercolor. That is our white gouache over the sky and some water. You can see it pretty good right there. I did do that black highlight, but it doesn't seem to pop out too much on that other gouache areas. So I think it's a good experiment. This will be something that'll just be a good palette add-on at times. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.